have a speaker, Dr. Revati, to detail us on the topic penetrating keratoplasty, the essentials. She is the Chief of Cornea and Refractive Services of Arvind Eye Care Systems, Coimbatore, has over 50 publications, has authored book chapters, and is a strong presence in national and international forums and a teacher of great value. We look forward to hearing from you, Dr. Revati.
Thank you, Chitra. Hi, good evening, all of you. And thank you, ARC and Dr. Chitra, for giving this opportunity. It's apt to start this session with the penetrating keratoplasty. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Because this is a full thickness corneal transplant. But historically, if you see, it replaced the lamellar surgeries, which started earlier because of its superior optical results. But it also has some of the significant weakness. For example, it's an open globe procedure. I don't think the present generation of ophthalmic surgeons are familiar with the problems of open globe procedure. And it also leaves behind a very weak scar, which can open up even after many years. And graft rejection is a major problem, and also the suture problems. So considering all these things nowadays, with better understanding of anatomy and also better instrumentation, again, the trend is towards the lamellar procedures with a better globe integrity. But still, we need this procedure in some of the conditions. For example, a full thickness scar, especially in the visual axis, or if it distorts the cornea too much to cause visual problem. And also combined dystrophies like macular dystrophy, which can involve even up to the endothelium, and Fuchs dystrophy sometimes can present, corneal ectasia can present with the Fuchs dystrophy, and long-standing bullous keratopathy can result in stromal scarring, significant scarring. Then keratoconus after a bout of acute eye drops can leave behind a nasty scar, which then we need full thickness grafting, and also regrafts. For example, the graft like here, a grossly decentered regraft, a graft which if we are going to do only an endothelial keratoplasty, the optical results will not be good. So you need a well-centered central penetrating keratoplasty here as a regraft. So this is a lifelong commitment between the patient as well as the surgeon for the graft to survive for a long time. So before going into the surgery, we have to assess the prognostic factors. One for graft survival, other for visual potency. Both can be different because, for example, a corneal pathology, a leukoma in the visual axis can have a better graft survival prognosis. But if that scar presence starts at the age of 1 or 2 for the patient, then the associating amblyopia is going to affect your visual potency. So that we have to keep in mind before advising surgery, and also the comorbidities if it is on an already operated eye or with other ocular problems or systemic problem. So to assess the risk factor, if for a graft to survive well, you need a wet ocular surface, a non-inflamed and intact ocular surface without any symblepharon or scarring. The lid should be normal. And more importantly, the limbal stem cell barrier should be healthy. And the corneal pathology ideally should be a one-time pathology like a scar, or a non-inflamed pathology like a dystrophy without any vessels. And if it is a recurrent problem like a viral keratitis, then again it's going to be reducing its survival chances. And even a first-time graft can have better survival potential than a regraft. And also the rest of the anterior segment, the anterior chamber as well as iris lens diaphragm should be intact anatomically. That is very important. And also your posterior segment. Coming to the donor factor, the donor factors has little role in graft survival. Once you select a good fresh donor donor material, the age of the donor actually plays very little role for the graft survival. Coming to the preoperative evaluation, you have to keep in mind all these things to evaluate the patient, and also very importantly, your torchlight examination, especially to look for the visual potential. Often you cannot do refraction or other things, so you have to look for phoria, tropia, fixation, and pupillary reaction if possible. Sometimes you may need you have to go for visual evoke potential. And you have to assess the anterior ocular surface as well as cornea in the slit lamp, and also the anterior chamber, especially if there is a pseudophakia, if there is a lens, It should not be mobile like this. It should be out, and ideally either natural or synthetic lens should be behind the pupil and with a round pupil. That is an ideal situation. And of course, you can use the imaging techniques whenever necessary to assess the posterior segment as well as the glaucoma part of the examination. Coming to the preoperative preparation, you have to restore the ocular surface and control the inflammation and the intraocular pressure. And if it is a recurrent pathology like herpetic scar, you have to start the prophylaxis, appropriate prophylaxis. And the anesthesia, you need, this is an open globe procedure. Again, I warn you. So you need a complete akinesia, lasting anesthesia for a longer time, and reliable control over IOP and BP. So if you can achieve these things, either with regional or monitored intravenous or general anesthesia, as per your preference, you can go for it. And the speculum should not give any pressure over the globe. And whenever the scleral rigidity is compromised, you can go for scleral rings to avoid the collapse. And then you have to mark the cornea as a first step. The graft should be centered to the pupil always. You have to remember that and mark the pupillary center. And you can mark these radial marks for aiding to aid in your suturing. And the trifines, the host cornea will be trifined, that is a circular rotatory movement. And this will be done either with a handheld trifine or with the hand-free vacuum trifines, which are more sophisticated to give better results. And first you have to choose the graft size. So mark and see, that depends on your host pathology as well as the corneal size. Ideally, it should be between 7 to 8 mm. You have trifines in 0.25 steps, so you can choose the correct size. And of course, with femtosecond, you can even the shape of the graft also can be changed. Coming to the donor cornea, you are going to punch the donor cornea, not refine the donor cornea. So the donor cornea, we punch from the endothelial side so that the endothelial damage will be minimal. And also you get a little larger endothelial surface with more endothelial cells. So the punching, again, you have to go choose 0.5 millimeter more. Normally, it can be between 0.25 to 0.75 because a little oversized graft will give a better contour as well as it will avoid trabecular collapse to prevent secondary glaucoma. Coming to a small video, this is an older video, sorry for the quality. It may not be, the instruments also may not be very sophisticated, as you can see here. First, we mark the donor size, we selected. So we are going for a 7.5 millimeter trifine to punch the donor cornea. So once you punch, then you take 7 millimeter trifine to do the trifining movement on the donor recipient. We will not enter with the trifine directly, up to 3/4 or 80 to 90% will go. Then enter the anterior chamber and fill it with the viscoelastic and gradually open it so that sudden opening of the anterior chamber will be avoided. And then all the extra tags should be trimmed and removed so that the sides should be vertical and regular. These extra tags can cause irregular astigmatism. Then the graft is sutured. First 4 cardinal sutures, because I always use the interrupted sutures. So go for 4 cardinal sutures, one in 12, 6, 3 and 9 o'clock position. The depth should be almost around 90% of the donor as well as recipient cornea. And the arm should be equal on both sides, and the tightness of the suture should be ideal. Like it should not be too tight or too loose, just proper approximation. And after putting, and each suture should be followed by the diagonally opposite suture so that uniform tension will be maintained in the cornea while suturing. So after putting these 4 cardinal sutures, you are dividing this corneal circumference as into 4 quadrants. So each quadrant will be filled with 3 sutures, as you can see here. Then after completing the sutures, trim the edges, and the knot should be buried onto the donor side so that to keep them away as much as possible from the limbus to avoid any vascularization and later rejection. So the suture, we have to remember the 4 cardinal sutures and the depth and the uniform tightness. It can be interrupted or it can be running suture or double running or a combined interrupted and running also. The interrupted sutures are ideal when there is a disparity between host cornea and the peripheral, the donor cornea. And later also you can manipulate each suture separately. If there is a loosening or vascularization, you want to manipulate the astigmatism, it's easy. But running suture is a more elegant one. But the problem is if one suture get cut somewhere, the whole suture has to come out. The post-operative care, usually antibiotics till only the epithelium heals. The steroid has to be gradually tapered over 3 to 6 months time and maintained as with a minimum of around one time to minimum of 1 year, or sometimes we try to keep them lifelong. And the cycloplegic hypotensives as and when required. And the main important thing, lifelong follow-up and the patient education to recognize early signs of rejection and come to you as soon as possible. And post-op each examination time, you have to carefully look at each suture for vascularization, loosening, signs of rejection, edema, rejection lines, and intraocular pressure, the fundus and refraction. Each time you have to do all this examination. And the suture removal usually starts after, I prefer to go after 1 year to up to 2 years. We can gradually remove the sutures, or sometimes we can keep them on as long as possible till you get a nice good scar like this. And if there is loosening or breaking or vascularization, you have to remove the sutures. And after each suture removal, remember you have to hike the steroids, because suture removal itself can precipitate graft rejection. And in high risk cases, we can also add topical cyclosporine or tacrolimus. And in viral keratitis scars, you have to continue the oral antiviral therapy for at least a year. Complications, intraoperative, as I said, it's an open globe procedure, so you can end up with any dreaded complication. So proper planning can avoid all these things. Still, the suprachoroidal hemorrhage or expensive hemorrhage can catch you, even an experienced surgeon suddenly. So you have to be well prepared for that. And post-operatively, in the early period, a poor donor selection can go for primary failure or a persistent epithelial defect, a wound leak, or endophthalmitis is another dreaded problem. The late complications, I am mainly the microbial infections associated with sutures has to be managed as microbial infection. Recurrence, you can expect in viral etiology, and glaucoma has to be managed with your glaucoma colleague. The other two problems are going to be dealt, because they are very important. They are going to be dealt separately later in the session. The glaucoma, better you have a good relationship with your glaucoma colleagues, because many times some of the drugs what they use as prostaglandin analogs or CA inhibitors may be detrimental for your graft. So you have to really have a lot of dialogue with them to manage the glaucoma in these grafts. And there's a very short literature review. This is some of the registry studies where they analyzed thousands of cases to come up with what we have seen already. What are the risk factors and the good things for predictors for graft survival. And in conclusion, this is still needed and relevant procedure in some conditions. So all of you should learn it as you are learning SACS or something in cataract. And you can get excellent results with proper planning, patient selection, and a lifelong partnership with your patient is very, very important to have very long success for this grafting. Thank you.
That was a very crisp, detailed talk, Dr. Revati. Dr. Rajesh, would you want to start? I might have a question or two to ask too.
And that was a very nice review of a broad topic like penetrating keratoplasty. Dr. Revati, the question that I have is, in the current era where lamellar keratoplasty, both anterior and posterior, seem to be quite popular, what are the common indications for penetrating keratoplasty in your clinical practice?
Yes, Dr. Rajesh, as I said, some full thickness microbial keratitis leaving behind up to the endothelium scarring, very nasty scarring. Even keratoconus post hydrops, many times we'll be able to do the DALK unless you have such a very bad scar. And we sometimes come across keratoconus with guttata. So we don't know. I really hesitate to go for only DALK in those patients. But I have done in one patient only endothelial keratoplasty for PKP and later DALK also. So maybe you can do, even such cases, you can go for lamellar keratoplasties, but maybe in experienced hands. And these are the main things, indications, I would say. Even in ICE, you can go for endothelial keratoplasty unless it's really bad anterior chamber.
Dr. Namrata, are
Yeah.
you there online?
Yeah, I am very much there.
What are the recent advances in penetrating keratoplasty? You had a recent publication on the role of intraoperative OCT during penetrating keratoplasty. So how has it changed?
So intraoperative OCT is a very useful tool for cases of penetrating keratoplasty, and is very relevant to country like ours, because all said and done, we may talk about lamellar keratoplasties, but 70% of the cases that undergo keratoplasty in our country, as per the Eye Bank Association of India statistics, are still full thickness corneal transplants. That too for reasons of either healed keratitis or for active corneal ulcer. Intraoperative OCT helps in these kind of cases because most of the cases may be, adherent leukomas or corneoiretic scars. So you actually know, looking at the intraoperative OCT, where is the iris and whether it is touching the back of the cornea or not, what kind of synechia are there, are they filiform or are they broad-based, and how should you trephine so that you don't, damage the iris and the iris gets spared. So in those kind of cases, it really helps, especially helps in children because children are very difficult to examine. So in those cases, in pediatric keratoplasty, they are extremely useful. Otherwise also, they help you, intraoperative OCT microscope helps you to see what you actually cannot see through a operating microscope otherwise.
I have one question. Would you treat an eye which has neurotrophy? Apparently, the ocular surface looks stable. Would you let the patient be with ambulatory vision, or would you want to intervene in these kind of cases?
It's a very nice question, Chitra. Like I forgot to mention that I really hesitate to touch a neurotrophic cornea if the cornea is anesthetic. And Dr. MS also often used to teach us. Sometimes you come across corneas after a very beautiful graft, after some time, for no reason, it will start melting. So these are neurotrophic corneas. And if, as you said, if the patient is having some ambulatory vision, I would prefer not to touch, especially penetrating keratoplasty. No. Maybe if it is endothelial problem, endothelial graft, it's okay. Like I won't touch it for a penetrating keratoplasty.
Your thoughts, Dr. Titiyal? Dr. Titiyal?
Yeah, good evening.
Yeah.
I think once you have a neurotrophic element in the cornea, it's mainly the anterior part of cornea which gets involved with the dryness or opacities. All these cases do very poorly with any sort of keratoplasty, maybe a lamellar or a full thickness. As you rightly pointed out, if patient has some ambulatory vision, it's better to delay the surgery in these cases. But in those cases where you have no other option, where you have to do surgery only, so maybe our first attempt should be to do a penetrating keratoplasty if the opacity is full thickness. If it is a anterior corneal opacity only, I would go for at least 7.5 millimeter lamellar keratoplasty in these cases. Then preserve the ocular surface as far as possible. Treat anything which is going to come immediately. So these cases on table, sometimes you might go for a tarsorrhaphy, which will give you some sort of management of ocular surface in these cases. Or people also have gone for putting an AMG graft in a very, very severe cases. If you have not done these two things, you observe your patient the first few weeks, how the patient goes. Accordingly, you can manage subsequently. So these patients are very high risk for a graft melting, as Revati had nicely told us. So you have to be very careful a post-op period when you are bombarding with the topical medication, especially steroids. You should be a little careful there. In a little bit of doubt, you must think of decreasing the palpebral size or give some sort of some cover with the AMG so that it doesn't melt out. And some people do put a contact lens also immediate post-op. That might help you regaining the ocular surface faster. But these cases are also very highly prone for infections also. So you have to be a little careful. And sutures also, whatever suture you put on table, they behave differently in these cases with the ocular surface disease. Very careful. Every time you see your patient, must stain ocular surface with the fluorescein dye. see what is the suture pattern, tight, loose suture that can be picked up by a fluorescein examination, and you can replace them or redo them. And any infiltration which is coming, infiltration in suture should be taken seriously in these cases because that can be infective.
I have one more question. It's a case, if it were a case of a unilateral blindness of cornea and is very much vascularized, would you still decide to do a PK with immunosuppression? Would you want to do a K-Pro, or would you not like to do anything at all?
I think that situation, let me answer, Revati, then you can take it over. Sorry, I was online.
Yes, sir. Carry on, sir, please.
So these one-eyed patients, and with such a vascularized corneal opacities, if you have a little window, sometimes you do have a little peripheral chunk available. The simple optical iridectomy or managing the pupil can help in these cases also. Even you get some ambulatory vision, which may be 460, 560, even we have achieved 618 sometimes also. That would do it. So that should be the first consideration for these patients. If you have no other area for making a pupilloplasty or something like that, then if you have to think of surgery, I would definitely give a chance for a penetrating graft in these cases. See how these patients behave. It is a primary surgery. Immunosuppression may not be required to begin with. But if fails and you have to do resurgery, yes, you have to keep them on immunosuppression for a long, long time. Even second surgery fails, then the option would be a K-Pro in these cases. So because one-eyed, I'll avoid K-Pro because life of K-Pro also is not very prolonged. So that you have to look into consideration. Yes, Revati, all for you.
Yes, sir. You covered everything, sir. Of course, same answer.
I think one more thing that generally is asked is, when would you have a sizing more than 0.5 millimeter? When would you have a oversized graft? So oversized is basically used for pediatric grafts, for therapeutic keratoplasties, and for corneoaredic scar. So this is one common question which is asked to the postgraduates. And the second is that in cases of fungal keratitis, invariably they'll ask after therapeutic keratoplasty, when do you start steroids? So the answer is after 2 weeks, after 2 weeks or after epithelial. I think you have a talk on that.
I
Then
think
maybe it can be. Okay.
Dr. Rajesh, more question.
Just one question. Dr. Revati did mention about the antiviral prophylaxis. Maybe I can ask Dr. Somshila regarding if you have a vascularized corneal scar of herpetic etiology, what kind of post-operative antiviral prophylaxis do you give? What dosage and what duration?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Fogel. I think you read my mind. I was just about to, although Dr. Titian has covered just about everything, but just the small point about when you do keratoplasty for viral etiology. So preoperatively, we do start the patient on antivirals and make sure that you have a quiescent period, as well as continue the same post-operatively. So I think Dr. Revati just mentioned that briefly. But Dr. Revati, I had a counter question for you. So since everybody's discussed that the indications, although 70% are there for penetrating keratoplasty, but most of the time these are the very tough and challenging kind of indications. And even if it's for an optical reason, then it's usually a vascularized graft. So do you use any intraoperative adjuncts like intraoperative subconj, bevacizumab, or post-operative eye drops? So I'm just asking that in the context of we have studied this more than once with subconjunctival injection as well as post-operative topical medication of the same bevacizumab, and we've had fairly good results. But of course, we also put the patient on preoperative immunomodulators.
Yeah, then we don't know which one acted. Actually, even I too prefer to, as a preoperative preparation, to give subconj Avastin or something, at least 2 or 3 times to see whether any regression. But generally, my observation, once these vessels, they establish very little regression of these vessels. And of course, in such cases, going for a systemic immunomodulator will be more ideal. Of course, no harm in trying these things because I don't think they are going to give any great side effects or anything.
I like to use the fine needle diathermy, what Dr. Harminder Dua has described, especially in cases where there are deep stromal vascularization. And I find that in addition to whatever topical therapies, your immunomodulators you are starting, The fine needle diathermy also helps reduce the vascularization, and subsequently when you do a full thickness graft, it tends to give a better outcome.
I have one more question. If it's a triple procedure, what would be the tips y'all would suggest to avoid on-table complications?
So I think Revati will answer that.
Yeah.
You mean the associated cataract extraction?
Yeah.
Some of my students used to do, like, if it is not a very bad cornea, they do a SACS or a phaco first and then go for the grafting separately. I don't know, but it's rarely, I have not tried that. Like as I said, gradual opening of the anterior chamber, and once you open, go for the lens removal. But generally, getting a rhexis will be very difficult. So plan for a sulcus fixated IOL, a three piece, something like that. As soon as you put the IOL in, and all these steps should be very fast. And sometimes you can use mannitol before, like if it is really like needed. Other than that, I don't take any other precaution. But of course, planning calculating the IOL power could be a challenging problem in these cases.
One thing
Yes,
I would
what
like
would
to
you
add here, and that is that when you're doing a triple procedure, many times when you remove the lens fibers, what happens that there is the posterior capsule becomes like a dome if there is a lot of positive pressure from the vitreous side. So in such cases, even implanting the IOL becomes very difficult. So if preoperatively we have to take precautions in order to reduce the pressure, have a good hypotony. But if at all that is happening, then in that case we may put initial cardinal sutures and then inject high viscosity viscoelastic to flatten the capsule and then implant the IOL. So that is something that sometimes we have to do.
Yes, Dr. Rajesh, it's a very important tip. Yes.
Yeah.
Also, aspirating the cortex, you should remember, as Rajesh pointed out, it will be like a dome instead of a convex surface, posterior surface, the posterior capsule. So when they are aspirating the cortex, they should not go deep. Like generally we go deep like this, but you have to be very careful. You have to keep it in the same plane, your movement of your IA.
Dr. Sudhir, you had something to tell?
I think in all cases of penetrating keratoplasty, it's better to have a Fleringa ring for safety. I think when it is highly vascularized, and in case of triple procedures, it gives you more safety. I think that is one thing which we need to look into it.
Good. And one other question I asked, I'm sure the answer is fairly obvious, but if a patient has a PK, would you prefer to do the glaucoma management before the graft surgery, or would you sometimes do it after?
You mean the glaucoma surgery?
Yeah, the patient has a glaucoma issue too.
If it is a PK, I would like to have the glaucoma surgery before.
Always before, I think.
Maybe EK, like, injecting air and keeping it, not for people like Rajesh and experienced surgeons, but others, it might be a problem. But for PK, it's always better you control the IOP with even surgery and then go for it.
Dr. Rajesh, any more question, or do we go on to the next speaker?
Can I make a quick comment,
Yes.
Dr.
Sure.
Chitra?
Yeah.
The quick comment is that contrary to conventional teaching, where probably when we were doing our fellowships, that whenever the patient has a cataract, it was told, or whenever the patient is in the 50s or 60s, to do a triple procedure. I think that now we can divide the two into two separate surgeries. Go ahead and if we have to do a PK, go ahead and do that first. And the cataract can be addressed at a separate sitting, because with the modern phaco, we don't have to worry really much about endothelial cell loss. We get a much better result, both refractive as well as surgical technique wise.
Yeah, you can calculate the IOL power better also, definitely.
Dr. Rajesh, anything to add?
One of the other things that you can do, there are two Rajesh here. So when you mention Rajesh, it refers to Rajesh Sinha and
Is the
myself.
surname? Both of them, are in attention position the moment you say that.
Yeah, both of us, we become attentive and we unmute ourselves.
No, we have to respond. So basically we can't. So Dr. Rajesh Sinha, please go ahead.
Okay. So what did you ask, Chitra? Can you?
I said, do you have any more questions to ask before we move on to the
No,
next?
one thing.
They are not attentive at all.
They both are thinking. They both are thinking the question is for the other one.
No, one thing I would like to add here is that see, based on head study, the prophylaxis for viral keratitis induced scar when you do a PK is for 1 year. That's what is the general practice. But these days things are changing, and a lot of people are using acyclovir for as long as possible, and you just keep doing the liver function and the renal function test done. So this is something which is changing now.